And so we begin. Little Elle was a girl who lived only in the virtual world. One day, Elle decided to open a cafe because it was boring in the virtual world with nothing else to do. To Elle's surprise, a guest happened to visit her cafe not soon after it opened. Elle was very happy and quickly became chatty and friendly with her new visitor. As the days went by, more and more visitors who had heard of Elle's new cafe came over for a visit. The food and beverages served at Elle's cafe were not the worst, but certainly far from the best. But she enjoyed preparing them and talking to her newfound guests, her visitors, just the same. And so, little Elle had a thought. Running this cafe makes me happy. Very soon, Elle's little cafe would attract a small collection of characters. A community, so to speak. Some with very similar tastes to Elle, and some who had very different tastes. It was a very diverse hodgepodge of different personas. There were those who enjoyed the savory meals, just like Elle. Those who liked the super sweet desserts, not like Elle. Those who would order a drink just to come by and say hi to Elle. And even those who just loved to challenge Elle to make all kinds of complicated beverages which were new to Elle. Elle treasured each of her experiences and interactions with her modest community of cafe regulars. But even though she was quite satisfied, Elle couldn't help feeling that the life of a cafe owner was becoming just a little bit stale and boring. Then, one day, a new visitor entered the cafe. While a little bit quiet at first, eventually the stranger asked Elle this particular question. "Hey, Miss Owner, aren't you a little bit evil, just like me?" Elle was quite delighted to hear these words, and she promptly replied, "Yes, aren't we both? What would you like to order?" And so, little Elle had a thought. It's nice to have someone around who is just a little bit evil, just like me. From that day on, Elle went on tending her cafe and even expanding the usual menu to accommodate all kinds of different tastes. She had many wonderful little interactions with a small community that was built not just around her cafe, but also by people who also frequented the neighboring establishments and who simply enjoyed the good food and good company inside of Elle's cafe. And even though she had never intended it, the stranger that Elle met on that day very quickly became one of her most cherished friends. Such feelings, after all, are not something you decide for yourself. It is something that yourself decides for you. But something happened along the way. As they say, too much familiarity breeds contempt. And perhaps this is why Elle did not realize that she had done something very hurtful to her precious friend while she was running her cafe. And so, over the course of time, Elle noticed a slight change in her friend. Her good friend had become just a little bit more distant, a little bit more argumentative, and sometimes just plain cold towards her. Very soon, Elle could not even catch a glimpse of her friend's shadow inside her cafe anymore. And so, Lil Elle had a thought. My friend is avoiding me. My precious friend now hates me. Thus, very afraid to make a real enemy of her friend, Elle also did the only thing she thought was right. Afraid to be hated and to impose on her friend, Elle simply pretended that things were okay and that she was unaffected. And so, even though her heart was in pain, Elle pretended as if everything was fine. And this went on for quite a while. But somewhere beyond the virtual world, in another place, at another time, Elle's other self, the Elle that others could not see, was fighting a different battle, alone. The other Elle was a stoic warrior who constantly fought a war to defend against the demons that threatened to someday consume the peace inside of Elle's virtual world. And for a little while, perhaps it was just bad timing, the other Elle, the warrior, was losing that fight. And so, some of the demons escaped and entered the virtual world. They corrupted Lil Elle's mind, causing her to imagine the worst things about herself. And even though she never wanted to, she also imagined the worst things about her precious friend. And so, Lil Elle had a thought. All the things I have done so far are meaningless, so I'm going to close the cafe. But just as Elle had made all the necessary preparations, just as Elle was ready to say goodbye to everyone and close down the cafe forever, Elle received a letter from her mailbox. It was from her friend, her former friend. It was a very long and detailed letter, and it thoroughly explained everything that had happened so far, and how Elle's own actions and inactions in how she managed her cafe had hurt her friend, and why she had been avoided. And so, Elle cried. Elle cried at the fact that she had done something to hurt her friend, and that it was something so trivial that she should not have allowed it to destroy their friendship, had she been just a little bit more perceptive. And yet, Elle still wanted to close the cafe that she had grown to love so much, because she wanted to punish herself for hurting her friend. But then, Elle was surprised when she checked the community board located at the center of the cafe. The tiny bulletin board was overflowing with handwritten messages and letters from the cafe regulars, from people who had heard the rumors that the cafe was going to close down. Elle's tears once again began to flow. But this time, they were tears of happiness. At that moment, Elle felt loved, and at the same time, very guilty for taking the people who cared for her for granted. Thus, she finally understood what she had to do. Fortunately, the letter from her friend came with a return address, and thus, though almost incoherently and certainly very hastily written, Elle wrote a long letter back to her friend. But even though it was a very long letter, the main message could be summarized in a single phrase. I'm sorry. It was supposed to be a tragic story. A classical rise and fall. A story of arrogance and pride. And a story of friends parting over the slightest of misunderstandings. And yet, sometimes, reality is stranger than fiction. In a good way. And so, Lil Elle had one final thought. I still love gaming. I still love streaming. I still love being myself. And I love you all for being here. I'm sorry for being selfish sometimes. And I hope you'll take good care of me in the future. Because you're here, I can be me. Thank you. Also, I'm glad that you're all a little bit evil, too, just like me. And that is from me, LCX. Thank you. That is the end of my little story. Yan, 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 ni hao yan. So, this is delicious agriculture.